AI in Healthcare panel this afternoon. Thank you all for joining. We have a great pool of panelists today. Thank you to the panelists for joining and spending the time with us today. I will briefly introduce the panelists, and then I'll let everyone introduce themselves and talk about their introductory perspective on the AI in healthcare, what's going on in their organization, and where they are and where they're heading towards. So we have a wonderful group of experts and executives from healthcare AI data analytics industry. We have Sanji Fernando, VP of Technologies from Optum Labs, Matthew D. Donato, Director at GE Healthcare, Nataraj Dasgupta, VP Technologies, RxDataScience Inc., and Slava Akmaev, CTO at Scipher Medicine. And my name is Shahidul Mannan. I'm the Head of Data Engineering and Innovation at Mass General Brigham. I'll be moderating the session. Happy to be here and happy to be here with a great panel. So as the day goes on, I'm sure you had an opportunity to jump into various exciting sessions in healthcare, AI, big data, which is close to everyone's heart and our work. And there's tremendous work that's going on in healthcare after, I would say, kind of falling behind for some time with other industries, retail and financial. Most recently, healthcare has picked up the most and growing at a higher rate than others. The investments and the VC, the startups, all those are great indicators of that. And it's definitely for a good reason. With the newer technology, cloud and NLP, everything coming together, now we are at a better stage to unleash the power of data and then unleash the power of insights and build more sophisticated advanced analytics leading to artificial intelligence. So I would start with our panel to again introduce themselves and start with their perspectives on this topic. I'll start with Sanji, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me today. I'm Sanji Fernando. I actually think my role hasn't been updated yet. I used to be with Optum Labs. I'm now with Optum proper, and I lead AI and analytic platforms for Optum, which is really, like you said, a reflection of the maturity, I think, of artificial intelligence, where we've moved out of the research phase and recognize the importance of scaling it around healthcare. Today at Optum, we are leveraging artificial intelligence in almost all facets of our business, and we've seen incredible impact in some of the areas that may be a little less sexy. As I tell people, we focus some of our efforts around administrative processes like revenue cycle management, payment integrity, risk adjustment. All are essential parts of a U.S. healthcare system. And as we discussed, we're happy to share why we think they're well suited for machine learning. But we think that's a great place for us to start as an industry to realize some of the benefits of these great technologies.
Excellent. Thank you, Sanji. Let's hear from Slava. If you want to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Shahidul. I'm Slava Akmaev. I'm Chief Technology Officer at Scipher Medicine. Scipher Medicine is a small company in Waltham, Massachusetts, very close to Boston. I've been in AI space and in healthcare for almost a decade, and it's been really interesting to observe the development and adoption of AI in healthcare, starting with primarily some of the early applications in life sciences, where some of the research was done in using genetic data, multi-omic data a little later, and understanding how to apply machine learning and artificial intelligence for primarily probably biomarker discovery and diagnostics. Then later, the industry transitioned to using AI more in healthcare, building predictive models for patient outcomes, for financial operational outcomes and cost effectiveness. And now it's becoming more and more present in real world evidence and other types of digital data that we observe coming on the market almost every day. It's interesting to say, great to see Sanji here, because Optum is one of our investors in Scipher Medicine. And I think the interest in the industry is really in advancing precision medicine, advancing precision therapeutics. Now we're going beyond precision medicine. We're talking about precision therapeutics, where there's a patient stratification before we even develop targets and drugs. And then we go into clinical trials with a specific patient subpopulation with particular disease. So advancing these approaches in both of these areas, I think, is very important. And we're driving towards precision medicine, obviously in oncology, but there are multiple disease areas that have been traditionally untouched by advanced technologies, and specifically autoimmune is still sort of wide open. And we're trying to make progress in rheumatoid arthritis, in IBD, and other areas in autoimmune.
Excellent, exciting stuff. Thank you, Slava. I request Matthew Di Donato to go next.
Thanks. So I'm Matthew Di Donato. I lead a product team within GE Healthcare building out our AI platform. And when I think about AI in healthcare, the biggest thing that pops into my head is just what a huge opportunity is. I think similar to the answer that Silva just gave, I think driving towards precision medicine from a number of different angles is exciting, something that GE Healthcare is interested in. In the interim, as we're collecting all of the right inputs to do that and building the right models, which I think is a big and challenging effort that will span many of the traditional verticals within healthcare. In that interim, I think it's really important, and I tried to highlight this in my talk earlier, sort of getting AI right and inserting it in workflows really is key. And that's something that I think is just really interesting for the industry overall. I think it's exciting to see how regulatory frameworks are evolving and sort of evolving based off of the technology and also the pace at which the technology sort of can produce results. The question is always, how can we go faster? Certainly, data collection is difficult in healthcare, not only because it's siloed, but because inherently there's patient information and sensitive information there. So my overall outlook on AI in healthcare is very, very positive because there's such a big opportunity, but there's clearly some hurdles that we have to systematically attack collectively as the companies that are doing it to get towards that big promise of precision healthcare.
Good points, Matthew. Thank you. Couldn't agree more. I think we are still scratching the surface as we are wrapping up, all the great data around the tip of the data scientists, and then I feel there's tons to go with the innovation wave that's coming in. So I'll move to our last panelist, Nataraj Dasgupta. Nataraj, if you want to introduce.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, but we can't see you.
Yeah, I need to fix that. I don't know why it just turned off, but let me just finish up the introduction and then I'll get to it. So thank you, Shahidul. So my name is Nataraj Dasgupta. I'm the VP of Advanced Analytics at a firm called RxDataScience. I have over 20 years of experience in this analytics field. My original experience was working on the trading floor of Swiss Bank for almost 8 years, working in high-frequency trading analytics. And about 7 years ago, I moved into pharma, and what I realized or observed was that the finance world had just so much more potential or capabilities already built up as far as the analytical sector was concerned, whether it was machine learning or just data mining. We could, there was a huge opportunity to apply those kinds of technologies and platforms in the pharma sector. So long story short, what ended up happening was we built a platform using some of the same tools that you find on the trading floor and got very popular, and some investors sort of spun it out into a startup, into a commercial entity of its own. Separately, I have written books on big data. I have multiple research papers, and academically, I have a master's from Imperial College. Now, currently at RxDataScience, we work on a variety of different real-world AI and machine learning problems. So we work with various pharmaceutical organizations and biotech organizations. Being on this side, one of the benefits has been you get a full sort of view into what different companies are doing. And there are various types of projects we do, from commercial to clinical to patient finder. But as we discussed, perhaps I'll get an opportunity to speak to some of them. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nataraj. I think at some point, we'd like to also hear from you how you would compare your experience and the AI progress that you have seen in the financial sector and now trying to implement similar in the healthcare sector. So thank you all. And for the first more rounded question, I would like to hear from you. What is the focus of AI in your organization today? And what are the key drivers or pain points that from a business or organization strategy perspective, you are focused on and using AI to augment or enhance that goal or meet that goal? And if you can also refer to any critical AI effort in your organization or in the industry that you find very much relevant for what you're trying to do in your organization. And I'll start with Matthew, if you want to give us your perspective on that.
Sure. So I think to first tackle the question on focus of AI within my organization here. So my team works across all of GE Healthcare, and I think the thread that pulls all of the different GE efforts together is sort of making GE devices, which are almost in every hospital across the globe in some form or another, making those devices easier to use, better images, reducing the amount of training it takes to use them, increasing the consistency between operators. I think making our devices easier to use is really the core of what GE is trying to do with AI, and build on that eventually towards incorporating the right information to drive towards precision medicine, as I mentioned. I think that there's clearly drivers both from clinical needs. I think that people want a better experience. And if we think about what we've gotten used to as consumers, if you think about the phone that you pull out of your pocket and how seamlessly and how intuitive that is to use, how it gets better over time, I think that's the same experience we want to drive with GE devices. We don't expect regularly that Apple, Google, consumer-facing companies will always call out that AI is being used. We want it to be in the underpinnings of the software and the experience you're having with the device, and that's what we're trying to drive with GE sort of across the organization. As far as any critical efforts or things in the industry that I think are interesting, one of the things that really sort of excite me is the evolving thinking around AI operations within healthcare. And what I mean by that is sort of finding ways to take advantage of the fundamental differences of deep learning and what the most recent incarnation of AI is, and doing that in a way that is regulatory compliant and makes sense. And what I mean by that is deep learning in particular differs from other forms of AI in the fact that it decides what features, what data, what pieces of information are important or not. And that means almost always more data is power. Certainly there's a difference between good data and bad data and levels of curation, but generally the more information you have, the more deep learning can take advantage of that. And so what's exciting me in the industry is finding ways to take advantage of that in healthcare that also keep patients safe and their information protected and private. And I also think there's interesting conversations about model and data drift and how when you launch something, things may be true about the macro environment, about the information coming in that shift over time, and how do we account for that? So I think that's an interesting mashup of the constraints and the regulated environment that is healthcare, and also the key aspects of AI in its most recent incarnation. And where those two intersect, I think the industry is starting to really sort of sort out the nitty-gritty details, and that will probably take years to evolve into its final form, but it's an exciting place to be.
Excellent. That is great to hear. And thank you, Matt. I would ask a follow-up question, and that would probably also go around, is from an organization perspective, do you see a GE kind of leveling at the AI and big data investments and initiatives, or do you see its increasing path still?
I think it's an interesting question, and I'm going to answer it with a sidestep, but I think it's actually the right answer, which is why I'm calling that out. So I think that the investment is increasing, but not because of specific groups or individual pieces of the organization. I think the investment is increasing because it is the fundamentals of almost all of the products that we're building now. Well, everything should be AI powered. And so as long as we're investing in growing the business, we're investing in AI, if that makes sense.
Totally, couldn't agree more. I think that is becoming more and more of the norm. AI is kind of becoming the bloodstream for the organization. So it is flowing everywhere. All the initiatives and various types of new capabilities or applications are becoming data and AI driven. So totally understandable and agree with that. I would like to move to Sanji, if you want to share.
Yeah, maybe just add a little bit of context to my answer. Optum is a brand that many people may not know, but we're a very large enterprise in the US, in the US healthcare market, serving almost every facet of the industry, patients, providers, other insurance companies, not just our sister company, United Healthcare, which is a little bit more well-known, local, like state and federal government. And so in that regard, we touch almost every part of the US healthcare system. Today we happen to employ more physicians than anyone in the US. We have a large ambulatory care business, and we deliver care now. We have a very large pharmacy benefit business. And I say all that because the initiatives that we explore for artificial intelligence are necessarily broad. We're looking at a range of things, things that you may typically expect us to explore, like clinical decision support, genomics, things like that, are all underway in our research organizations. Our technical teams are looking at how machine learning can be used to improve ETL processes in our databases, for instance, or optimizing resources across our data centers. And so in some ways, it's very pervasive, and we're excited about that. If I think about what's happening in the industry that's interesting to us is that with very specific examples, artificial intelligence is finally becoming part of our core products. Not all of them, but many of them. And as we especially look at high transaction, high processing workflows, like say revenue cycle management, and we introduce artificial intelligence, the exciting part for us is recognizing now that these are not science projects, but real important capabilities in our products, and the necessary model operations that we need to do and implement. I think Matt just mentioned things like monitoring for data drift, retraining, ensuring we are evaluating models for appropriateness and fairness. Things like that are incredibly important now that these models and these solutions are becoming a core part of how we go to market and offer services to the range of customers we serve.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. That totally makes sense. I'd move to Slava, if you want to share your organization's focus.
I wanted to mention that our main technology platform that we use at Scipher for discovery came to us from Northeastern University, and it's called Network Biology. It's a platform that analyzes big data, if you will, big experimental biological data, and comes up with insight that is relevant for precision therapeutics and precision medicine. On top of that, we analyze high throughput molecular data and we link it together with this sort of topological data set that we get from network biology. And that leads to the discovery of patient subpopulations, disease subgroups, and driving towards precision therapeutics. The biggest challenge that I think we have in our space is data that is in essentially molecular, right? Kind of following on Nataraj sentiment about trading data, right? I've had some experience with trading data as well. When you look at trading data, it is so precise and it's so accurate. Like you can get trade information that's per second and you get exact data that has no variability in it. It's really, really well set up for neural networks or deep learning or other types of statistical analysis or machine learning and AI. When you go to life sciences and you begin to look at mass spectrometry data, for example, or you're looking at next-gen sequencing data, RNA expression data, it is so noisy compared to what you see in digital world or trading data, right? It is noisy, it has biases, it has batch effects, it has other types of deficiencies that are really difficult to deal with when you're working with an algorithm like deep learning, right? Because you may train the algorithm to recognize features that are completely irrelevant to the clinical outcomes or to the desired outcome that you're looking at. But we're able to fight through these things, and AI and machine learning is in the center of our product development. We use it for everything that we do. We just recently launched a product in rheumatoid arthritis that's called Prism Array. It's a diagnostic test that uses an algorithm, specifically a random forest, that calculates a score for a particular individual patient to whether they are likely to respond or not respond to the anti-TNF therapy. It's an incredible application that is practical, that we use on a daily basis. Now patients have access to it, and it uses machine learning algorithm every day, calculating that score out of multiple variables or features. On top of that, as I talked about therapeutics, we begin to sort of unravel this process of precision therapeutics, where instead of going and initiating clinical trials that are looking for averages in hundreds of patients, whether we see an effect of a very small size and potentially we have 15% of people responding to the therapeutic, and we need to enroll hundreds of people to actually observe that effect statistically, we take a different approach. We identify patients through biomarker molecular signatures, and then we use those signatures to enroll patients in our phase 1, phase 2 trials that are more likely to respond to the therapy. In a way, we can dissect a complex disease such as, for example, IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, and sort of take away patients that are not likely to respond to our investigational therapy and really minimize the size of clinical trials so that we focus on 15, 20, 30 individuals, but we know that they're more likely to respond and that the effect size of the trial that we're running is going to be pretty significant with small number of patients. So all in all, our approaches are nested in AI, machine learning. We use random forest, as I mentioned, we use neural networks, we use Bayesian approaches as well, and other types of statistical learning methodologies that are commonplace in the space.
Excellent.
Shahidul, Nataraj Dasgupta was not able to get his video. Now, little suggestion, or maybe on his own, he's now available on the video. So just
thank you, Dr. Murthy. I can see that.
Good news.
Great, Nataraj. Good to see you and connecting with the voice. Do you want to go next, talking about how your organization is focusing on AI now?
Sure. So being sort of on a provider side, we work with our end clients, right, and organizations. And many of the participants here, we worked with their organizations as well as the data sets like Optum, IQVIA, etc. So in terms of some of the recent projects we have done, I think two sort of stand out. One is on Patient Finder. It's a very critical topic, especially when it comes to rare diseases, because if you think of it, you're going to have, let's say, 1 or 2 patients out of 1 million patients who qualify for that rare disease. It's a non-trivial problem, and typically, that's something that we do in conjunction with EHR records as well as structured data like claims data sets. For a rare disease company, the price or the value of finding patients is extremely high. And finding those patients, even when the patient themselves don't know they have the rare disease, is sort of a challenge in and of itself. It's sort of a balance between specificity and sensitivity. So it's sort of a class imbalance problem. So that's one. The second one is adverse events. So predicting what kind of adverse events follow a sequence of adverse events, and that's typically from clinical trials data sets. We are also into other ones, they're more on the scientific side, which is, for instance, there's something we do called quantitative systems pharmacology. I'll maybe very briefly mention that it's basically on the preclinical stage. Instead of testing a new drug on a patient, it is possible to model the patient using systems of ODEs, or ordinary differential equations. It's a very sophisticated method, but it's sort of becoming an industry standard. So those are some of the ones that we've been involved in. These are real world projects at very large pharmaceutical organizations.
Excellent. A lot of outstanding initiatives and thought works, and tremendously value-added work going on in all the organizations. Thank you all for sharing. For the next question, I would actually start with Nataraj, since we got his video up. The question is, what are the key challenges that you see in the industry as we are trying to march along managing the big data and building out new innovation with AI? And then honing into specifically your work area organization, what would be the top 3 or top 2, your pick, that you would identify as the biggest challenge, and how you are going about it?
Sure. I think it's a very, thank you for that question. It's a very pertinent question, especially when it comes to this topic in the healthcare sector, right? Because I came from finance, data was available. I come into pharma, and then data is such a huge problem. So I think data governance is one of the biggest challenges that we come across. One is data access, data sharing, data restrictions. So not only do you not have access to certain data sets. For instance, if it's EHR records as a pharmaceutical organization, a lot of times you might not be able to get the actual doctor's notes. Data sharing. So even after you have access to the data, can you share it internally with other organizational members? And overall data restrictions, or the process of sort of cataloging the data rather, because when a large organization has so many different data vendors, whether it's IQVIA, Flatiron, Proven Market Scan, all these different data vendors, and there's so many different types of data sets, the organization needs to have a proper meta repository of these data sets so as to be able, so the right people are able to find the right data sets. The second one that I'll mention is resources. So one is machine learning and AI resource, where you have a certain level of competency, which requires, let's say, deep learning, understanding of the quantitative fundamental principles of AI. And then you have a section with bioscientists. So there's sort of almost I wouldn't say it's a divide, but they're 2 separate worlds, and getting them together to work together is one of the biggest challenges. So one side wants to, even at a very basic level, one side wants to use Python, the other one uses SAS for all their work, which is totally understandable. But you asked two of the main ones, and I'll say data access and resources would be the top 2 in my mind.
Excellent perspective. Thank you. I think certainly we hear data a lot, and anything around data, especially having HIPAA, PHI, and all the compliance regulations coming on board, or having those on us for good reasons, of course. I think we're much more, I would say, constrained in some ways and careful about those. So thank you for sharing. I would move to Slava to share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's interesting how the industry have evolved. And Nataraj, he mentioned Flatiron. We all know about Foundation Medicine and this sort of relationship that they've developed with Flatiron to get access to data that combines molecular data and healthcare data from EHR systems for patients in oncology. So I think that's a great example where the industry is moving towards. What we're trying to do at Scipher is to create the same type of structure in autoimmune disorders. We are accumulating industry-leading databases and data sets of molecular data in rheumatoid arthritis and IBD, and we are linking that data with some of the EHR and claims data that is present already in healthcare by working with multiple organizations on the healthcare side, primarily physician-organized healthcare systems and data partners. A number of companies that link third-party data together in insignificant numbers, right? So by putting these types of data sets together, maybe it's registered data, maybe it's data coming from EHR systems, maybe it's molecular data coming from genomics analysis. We believe that by integrating these data sets together and analyzing it en masse, and we're talking about not just 200, 300 patients, we're actually looking at tens of thousands of patients, integrating it together and using advanced machine learning methods and AI, putting it on biological pathways and understanding how real molecular biology and some of the molecular phenotypic metrics driving real outcomes that we observe in the clinic, then that allows us to create interventions and do a lot of the in silico simulation work that used to be done in laboratory. So we can actually do simulations and perturbations in our system and understand how specific targets can affect patient populations and how is this leading to change in the phenotype, which becomes really powerful. So we're building the system in autoimmune diseases, and I think in the next year or two, we'll be able to identify most promising and really targets that have high likelihood of validation and deep foundation in biology in multiple diseases in the autoimmune space.
Excellent. Thank you, Slava, for sharing. I would move to Sanji, if you want to share your perspective on this.
Yeah, I'd agree with all the challenges described, Slava and Nataraj. One I'd add is I think we all hope and intend that our organizations are transformed by AI, that we can think and do what we do differently and maybe more effectively and more performantly. And so one of the things that I think is a big challenge for all of us is working through what is the change management for a large organization to understand and embrace and adopt artificial intelligence and machine learning and some of these more advanced capabilities. All of it, being someone in a technology background, I've had a healthy dose of skepticism maybe when I hear the word change management, and I realize how important it really is because we're not running into roadblocks where people are not saying, I don't want to use artificial intelligence or machine learning, or this is not something I want to adopt. It's more the opposite. Folks are excited and engaged across our enterprise to do this. And but now we want them to be upskilled in a way to understand when it's appropriate, when it's well suited to use something like machine learning. When do you have the data? When do you have labels? We sort of prefer to do things in a supervised learning manner whenever possible. And for folks with a non-technical background, how can we give them sort of a baseline set of skills so they can understand that and be great partners with us or with anyone they're working with in designing and transforming their own businesses? One of the things I'm responsible for is an AI learning program that we run out of our team. And initially, we started focusing on data scientists and giving them a better set of skills that allowed them to move beyond, sort of pure statistical methods and adopting some more advanced machine learning, neural network, even some of the reinforcement learning concepts that are emerging. But then we quickly realized that, the people we also need to engage are the product managers, the operational leaders, the clinicians, to give them maybe not the same set of skills, but enough for them to engage with our data scientists, with our machine learning engineers, so we can have a really productive conversation almost, where we all can bring our subject matter expertise together and really understand the problem, face into things like regulatory change and things like that, but do that together. And so, like I said, was a healthy skeptic of change management. Now I realize it's central to our success, at least at Optum today.
Excellent point. Excellent point. It's always the transformation comes with people, process, and technology changes. You need to march along and have the right balance. So spot on that. And I was going to have a follow-up. Do you see with this evangelism that you just mentioned that you are also moving towards more data democratization or self-service, so more and more experts across the enterprise can participate in this data and AI conversation and transformation?
I think the answer is a qualified yes. And I think you probably know it just as well as I do. I think when we think about data democratization, we want to enable teams to leverage data whenever possible. But we're in healthcare, and we have great stewardship over the data that we all work with. Not only because of the regulatory regimes like HIPAA, but our own mission to serve members, patients, providers across the industry. So, I think when I think about data democratization, I think we want to make data accessible, but safely accessible with the right governance and control. And sometimes that takes more time for us to specify and plan out how we want to design and train models. Maybe we don't have the same velocity as another industry, maybe social media or retail. Not that they don't have new and important restrictions and regulatory regimes in place as well, but we've been doing, like, I've not been doing this, but HIPAA's been around since 1996, I think. I think in healthcare, we have a DNA for being real stewards of the data that we're asked to use with on behalf of all these important constituents. So it's absolutely the right thing to think about, but I think we do it much more thoughtfully. At least I know we do at Optum, and I'm sure we do it across the industry.
Excellent point. Couldn't agree more. Amen to data protection. That's our badge, right? Thank you, Sanji. I'll move to Matthew. Do you want to share your perspective on this?
Sure. So I agree, I think, with everybody's answer here. So I think change management and like the ability to find solutions that can be taken up both by customers as well as internal organizations. I completely agree with. Everybody also touched on data. My thought on data is in every industry, data is sort of the bottleneck for AI development. I think all of the privacy restrictions that we've talked about are important. The only other take that I would add on top of that, which again I agree with, is we've got a number of data silos and systems within healthcare, and certainly solutions like FHIR, HL7, right, hope to break down walls between those data silos and allow us to connect patient information across the different clinical systems that are used to provide their care. But I do think that, like, the reality is there's a lot of existing software out there with long life cycles. And I think this is going to continue to be something that as AI developers within healthcare, sort of finding ways to efficiently circumvent the walls that are built up, maintaining privacy and things like that. But finding a way to connect the right information to build AI is going to be really important. On top of that, not everything's structured, right? If we look at reports, reports in a clinical setting are generally unstructured, and certainly AI can actually help here, like NLP and solutions that actually can take unstructured information and make it structured can be useful. And you get solutions like, I think Stanford has done a number of publications about weak labeling associated with NLP, reading through reports and then applying sort of some level of curation to data. So I think there's an interesting take on the reality of a lot of existing software being out there and it having long life cycles. We're going to have to find the right technologies to overcome that. And the only thing I would add on top of all of that is that there is a growing investment, right? I talked previously today in my presentation. Last year alone, $4 billion of invest from venture capitalists has come into healthcare. Depending on how you count that, the number could be even higher. I do think that it creates a paradigm where we've got a lot of point solutions, and we've got a lot of point solutions because that's kind of how AI works right now. We don't have generalized AI. We have AI that replicates and predicts things based off of examples it's seen. That ends up meaning that we're going to have a lot of companies with a lot of opportunity. It creates a lot of churn in purchasing decisions that we will have to take on as an industry. I do think the concepts of marketplaces make sense here, but they also come with their own trade-offs and caveats. So I think it's an interesting dynamic to keep track of, which is not only how do we build these solutions, but how do we tackle sort of the business side of them as well?
Excellent point. Thank you. I think, Nataraj, you have a question on this topic to Sanji. Do you want to?
Yeah, I actually just wanted to make a quick comment. And one other thing, that Matthew just mentioned with regards to AI, right? So I think a lot of the work that we do falls in the realm of machine learning, so to speak, because technically AI should be able to synthesize something. For instance, in drug discovery, it's not there in the training data set, and you're coming up with a new synthetic compound as an example, right? Now, in terms of what Sanji also mentioned, I think it's important to bear in mind that we have to be judicious about what to use and when to use them. A lot of times you get a lot of information just by doing a simple average, which can be very insightful. But what tends to happen is that when a data science, it's given to a data scientist, the first reaction is, let's try support vector machines, a random forest, or something fancy, which might not be the right sort of ROI. I've done a lot of Kaggle competitions, and you can spend a month improving our accuracy by 0.01, but it doesn't have a proportional cost benefit trade-off, so to speak. And second is knowing what to use. For instance, let's say if it's a machine learning or AI problem in supply chain, it's better done using something like optimization. And optimization is a field in and of itself, or if it's something to do with, healthcare studies where there's field survey reports and so on, then there's econometrics or panel regression. So basically, I think, it's very important to know what to use for a given problem within a time constraint. And secondly, what kind of theoretical basis to use for the problems.
Excellent point. Any other follow-up or questions from panelists on this? All right, thank you. I think we can move on to our next topic, which is we all are going through the pandemic, and I know being in healthcare, we are really the most impacted in terms of shoring up our services, capabilities, how to optimize, operations in some cases, how to best produce capacity management, or how to best go about capacity management and whatnot. Wanted to hear your experience and kind of stories from your organizations. What is the impact, and what, if any, from the data analytics side or AI side that has spun out of this crisis? I want to start with Sanji.
Yeah, we have so many amazing data scientists and statisticians and analytic professionals across Optum. And so when the COVID crisis hit, you saw a real groundswell of work and effort and focus across our enterprise. And I think maybe to Nataraj's point too, as someone who's more focused on machine learning, I think there's an initial question, as you can imagine, all of us, like, hey, can AI help here? How can we help with, what can we do with AI? What, can this sort of help magically solve some important problems, whether it be capacity, availability? You remember the ventilator crises we had. and if I'm really honest, what I struggled with is that it was a very hard thing. And I don't think I personally was able to contribute in a way that was meaningful in solving problems because we didn't have a lot to learn on, like this was so new, there was so much uncertainty. I'm sure there's, someone smarter than me who could think about an unsupervised method that might help in this instance. But some of the things we relied on are well-founded epidemiological models that look at the spread of disease, some of the optimization algorithms that Nataraj mentioned that have been in place, we've studied and understood for many years. And so in that regard, it was the best of times and the worst of times. We rolled the sleeves and tried to do a lot to help contribute. But I think it also, reinforced that sometimes these methods aren't the right answer, and in some circumstances, we can't help by applying, a really fancy neural network with multiple layers and use AutoML to restructure it, because maybe we just don't know what to learn from and how to learn from it. So that's, sort of a very personal story, and I'm sure there are others who smarter than me who could have figured out how to do that, but I felt like we had to rely on the things we knew about that we've used for years and decades. And that was a bit eye-opening for me.
Excellent. No, I think great points. Thank you. And to share, tagging along with the story, I think that is right. On our end at Mass General Brigham, also as we were faced with COVID, we jumped in with, on the front line as well as in the operation and capacity management and all that. And one thing we did from a data analytics side is we had on our roadmap and planning to be more real time in our operational business intelligence and getting the insights on various. So that is something we jumped in quickly because there was so much necessary, as you mentioned, on capacity management, from people to ventilators to beds. So we put out the new architecture and got all the data in and put in the plumbing with HL7 streaming coming from Epic, and pretty quickly spun out pretty robust capabilities to monitor almost minute by minute where everything is and where the next focus needs to be, which has been tremendously helpful in kind of managing the resource constraints that we have all been going through. So it's best of times and worst, definitely with so many deaths and so many suffering, but in a way, it also gave opportunity to expedite some of the innovations and standing up capabilities like that. So I wanted to hear from Matthew. What's your observation, experience, or your organization's situation with this?
I think it's a really interesting time, as we all said. I think that certainly if you look at GE and there's sort of two big segments, there's like our manufacturing division and the devices we produce, and then also the software that we produce on top of that. And been really proud to be part of an organization where when there were lack of ventilators and things like that, we found ways to increase production and make sure that we met or help to meet the world's needs there. I also think that there were cases we've got a solution in a business line we call our command center, where we sort of aggregate analytics, and that has been helpful for customers that have had that keeping track of their COVID units and patients that have, I guess, planning for their COVID units as well, pulling in like population health information and making sure that sort of hospitals are ready for surges in demand and things like that. So I think we did find a couple ways to address the problem, but I think I agree with the general sentiment that a couple things. AI isn't always the right solution, right? If you're a hammer, everything's a nail, and I try not to be an AI hammer. And sometimes the simpler solution is the better solution. But it was very interesting to me when highlighted was certainly the rate at which we can build things with AI is really, really fast. But that bottleneck of understanding what to build and having the right data to do it can be long. And so even if training and a data scientist take a week, a day, an hour, you still got to know the right thing to solve. And you got to have the right curated data to do it. And in this case, it's hard to know, are radiology images predictive or diagnostic? We don't know. Like, this is a brand new area for us to look at. if they are, do we have the right information and the right curated data to actually build a solution? And it highlighted to me that for as fast as this technology goes, there are still bottlenecks, and we still can't go as fast as the world changes. So we should try not to be that AI hammer and find the right solution for the right problem.
Excellent insight. And Matthew, I couldn't agree more. Actually, as I was listening to you, it reminded me of a famous quote that I always like. Einstein, I think, once said that when you're trying to solve a problem, you spend 90% of the time understanding, assessing, and analyzing the problem, and the 10% for actually solving it. And I think that's a perfect framework for data science and data-driven AI solutions. So great insight. Thanks for bringing that up. Nataraj, do you want to weigh in on that?
Sure, yes. I think, I mean, I agree with everyone. You know, there's like COVID doesn't really have a precedent. You know, it's a very unique situation where you have a two-pronged supply shock and a demand shock. And, you know, there are ways to cushion those shocks, but then you have this, it's called a key nation supply shock. You know, it's a supply shock that causes a higher than expected demand, owing to the indirect effects of the job loss, reduced consumer spending, and so on. So anyway, I mean, that's sort of besides the point, but basically when you don't have a precedent, when there are no models that have been done for a pandemic situation, I mean, I've just seen like maybe 2 or 3 papers, which are based on H1N1 long years ago, which talks of a situation like this, because it's just so unique, you know. And what happens in these circumstances is that you switch to basic research, which is what has been traditionally successful. There's really not that much of a time for experimentation. Like, you need to move fast. But yes, over time, you know, there will be different ML methods that will come up, like capacity planning and so on. But I just want to reflect on a slightly different sort of area in pharma that has adopted to this, which is omni-channel marketing and digital marketing, especially from the commercial research side, right? So those are in IMS quintiles, and more of the physician data side. They would understand basically, since the reps can't really visit the doctors and so on, promotional mix modeling has got a totally new uplift. You know, how do I get messages across to physicians? Because suddenly now I'm no longer in call planning stage. I'm no longer making visits to the physicians, but I have these digital methods through which I have to optimize my message. So I think in that regard, what we have seen across these different organizations, a huge push towards omni-channel, as well as areas such as digital, where the industry has started shifting. And I think it might be a bit permanent. And as people find out these are benefiting or adding value, there would be some lasting effects that will prevail after the crisis.
Exactly. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Thank you. Thank you for that insight. I think this has been great discussion, and we could go for hours. It's a great panel and a lot of wonderful topics to talk about. I think we are getting close, so I would like to go around and hear from you in general, kind of your closing statement, and where do you see organizations and your organization and the industry going forward in this very exciting space. I would also give a reminder to all our viewers that right after this, there are mentoring session with the speakers that is going to be available for healthcare, finance, and automated world leadership, all those topics. I think you all have registered for some with the speakers of the conference. So please jump into that after this session that starts at 3:55 p.m. Eastern Time and 12:55 p.m. Pacific Time. So just wanted to put that out. So I'd like to hear your thoughts, closing statement and parting thoughts on the industry, starting with you, Sanji.
No, thank you. It's been a great panel, and I think everyone on the panel has really shared a lot of great expertise. You know, my thoughts are probably just very broad. I think you've heard a lot about the promise and the limitations of artificial intelligence today. But if I look out over a 10-year span and the impact on healthcare, I'm optimistic and hopeful that we're going to see tremendous, not just change for change's sake, but hopefully real value being driven out of this capability where for the first time we can take complexity and maybe make it work for us in a way that's accessible and important. But it'll take time, it'll take time for us to do that thoughtfully and safely. This is probably a marathon, not a sprint. But I'm excited to be part of it and excited for discussions like this. It validates some of the things that we're thinking about, but also recognizing that, I think Matthew said, this is not a hammer. This doesn't solve everything. It takes a lot of work and time and effort to get this right for everyone. But I'm excited to be part of that conversation.
Excellent. Thank you, Sanji. Great insights, and thank you again for joining. Looking forward to continuing the conversation. I would like to hear from Matthew. What are your thoughts? And thank you again.
I want to thank everybody involved with the conference first. It's fantastic, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to speak with everybody today. My takeaway would be I really am optimistic and excited about the advancements in healthcare going forward. I think it will make for better lives for all of us. It will make for a more efficient system overall, and the world will benefit. And it will take time, but I'm very optimistic. I think my only ask would be to those that are listening that aren't as familiar with the underpinnings of AI to spend some time looking at it. It is something that is going to drive almost every industry going forward, and it is not foolproof. There are biases and bad models, and it is not a magic bullet always. And so the more knowledgeable you are, the more you'll understand and be able to weigh in on sort of how the world is evolving. So that would be my ask.
Excellent advice, and certainly it's the decade of AI, as we all say, that's coming or we are going through, and there's tons to happen, and it's going to be reflected every aspect of our life, and a lot to do at a huge pace of innovation in healthcare, certainly. Thank you, Matthew. And we want to hear from Nataraj.
Sure, yeah, I'll make it quick. So, my hope is perhaps, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now, the next time there's a crisis, we're going to have an AI machine that's going to find a vaccine within a week. Well, maybe not that quick, but someday in the future, so when I joined from finance into pharma, I saw, well, there was no deep learning in 2013, but deep learning was there, like neural networks was there on the trading floor. They were using CUDA on GPUs. So there has been some catch up, but it's come a long way. And, it's the development or the evolution that we're witnessing, where, scientists are making more and more use of AI or machine learning, understanding its benefits and limitations. And I think it's sort of a journey, we are at the very early stages, and I'm quite confident, some years hence, when the next crisis comes, it's going to be much more, the outlook will be much more promising than it is today. So there's always that hope, and that's my sort of belief in the future.
Excellent. Thank you, Nataraj, for the wonderful insights. And with that, I think